alignment and simplicity and getting the board and the sales team on the same page. So the science of sales and the art of sales on the same page and aligned on the same comp plan is really critically important. And unfortunately, a lot of companies don't have the opportunity to have that because they bring in a new VP of sales leader, CFO comes in, new board member. All of these people have inputs to the alignment of a sales comp plan, and that causes issue. I definitely think that the comp plan, if you have a strong enough sales leader, really does hinge on the VP of sales to get all those inputs. They should act like a product leader in that regard, take the inputs, and then present to the CEO, to the board to get something signed off on.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was AJ Bruno. He's the co-founder and CEO at QuotaPath. And this is a fun conversation from the archives of the Sales Enablement Podcast because AJ and I get into it about a really important topic in sales, which is, does it make sense still to pay commission to sellers? I mean, should there be incentive compensation for sellers? Because we explore the idea of how do you fairly measure the value of a seller's contribution to the outcome of a sale? And how do you fairly compensate sellers based on that contribution? We also dig into the topic of what the circumstances are or should be where paying commission doesn't make sense. And then AJ and I dig in the whole topic of quota. I mean, is quota still relevant in today's sales world? And if not, why not? And what would we use instead of quota to measure sales achievement? And then AJ shares some great advice as a second-time founder about how to scale and manage your sales team. So lots of great practical takeaways today. So let's jump into it with AJ Bruno. AJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Andy. Pleasure being here.
So I have to ask, what does the AJ stand for?
Oh boy. The AJ is Anthony James Bruno the Third.
Third.
My dad goes by Tony. My grandfather went by Anthony. And I've always, my entire life, gone by AJ. I tried to change it in college to Anthony. I worked at a restaurant, and my first day they printed on the name tag Anthony. I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm going to grow up. I'm going to be Anthony. So I went by Anthony like the first couple of weeks, and then I started becoming friends with people at the restaurant outside of work, and they started calling me AJ. And so it was this weird like second month situation where half the restaurant was calling me Anthony and half was calling me AJ. And I walked in, and my supervisor sat me down. She goes, "Hey, is your name AJ?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, it is, Anthony James Bruno the Third." And like, "Why do you make us call you Anthony?" I'm like, "Well, the name tag was already printed. It was lovely there." And she was pretty upset, actually. So I went by AJ at the restaurant, and now I'm AJ for the rest of my life.
Now the world knows. So have you made that your official name, like on passports and so on?
No, I've had issues in the past where the third is sometimes. I just got my passport renewed. Like prior to COVID, it was like February. I got my passport renewed because I had a trip to London, and it was left off, but it's on my birth certificate. So I won't. I'm not even going to deal with a name change.
Yeah, especially with passports and so on. It's hard to do. All right. So for people who aren't familiar with QuotaPath, tell us what you do.
QuotaPath, we are a commission tracking platform that's built specifically for sales teams. However, we do have parts of the app that are for finance and sales ops and rev ops, and I mean, really end to end. But we built it with the rep in mind first because it's a problem that I dealt with leading sales teams where my entire team would approach me at the end of the month. They're like, "Hey, my spreadsheet says that I made this and you paid me wrong." I'm like, "What?" Like, "Yeah, don't you remember that split deal?" I'm like, "Oh, your stupid spreadsheet." So I just want to take the headache out of that and build a platform that everyone could transparently align to and see very clearly. And we have QuotaPath.
Interesting. So how long have you guys been around?
We are coming up to year 3. April will be our 3rd birthday. So
nice.
Young, but not young in startup world. So it's we're growing up into adolescence, I suppose, a little bit.
Well, so one of the questions I wanted to ask and get into in the show is one that's increasingly being talked about is, so what's the future of incentive compensation in sales?
Yeah.
And yeah, I know there's all this talk out there about, quote unquote, modern sales, which is a term I hate, by the way. But and for one of the reasons, like our compensation. I mean, we measure performance and we pay for performance. Yeah, basically the same way we did 100 years ago. So not very modern at all.
Right.
And question is it still working?
Yeah.
I would just say, let's start with that question. Is, should there be incentive compensation for salespeople?
Yeah, I mean, our name in our QuotaPath and quota in the name, it would be very tough for me to sit here and say, oh no, get rid of quotas. I think there's a lot of folks that you have said that are trying to monetize it and say, should salespeople even have targets? Should they have goals like that? And I mean, I very much say, yeah, they definitely should. We've seen a variety of changes. I think when everyone went into the inside model, there was a variety of things were happening. First off, you saw a handful of folks, a handful of companies really lay off parts of their team, just like overnight.
Sure. Sure.
And I realized that seems very brash. Obviously travel is a little bit different, but for a lot of industries, it just didn't seem like the right move to do it right off the bat. And then once that happened, a lot of people were scrambling and saying, you know what, we're just going to get rid of quotas right now, or you're going to get a lift, and then let's figure out what it is. And that kind of transitioned to the summer, where lots of things happened in the summer. Things like picked back up, and especially in software, a lot of companies and organizations did really, really well and blew it out of the water. So all teams really not change so much what their quotas and targets were looking like. And I would have expected it probably to be a lot more, but people just don't like to upset that. And that's the evolution. So you nailed it. Quotas haven't changed for 100 years. And what we have seen, it's a little bit like the tax code, where you'll add layers upon layers upon layers. And so when a brand new hire right out of school gets into an SDR, maybe even a closing role, if that still exists. My first role out of school in 2008 was a cold call to close role. They get into that role, and then they're handed a basically 7-page document for them to sign on their incentive compensation management platform, which I hate that term. I hate that term,
Right.
by the way. So sales comp, which is an easy way to say it, having all those terms, it's like, well, I need like a PhD to explain my comp. That doesn't make so much sense. So we've actually seen them get a little bit more, even more complicated. And we have a handful of teams that I've talked to that don't have their comp plan yet, which we're at the end of January, and here we are, and they might not get it before the end of the quarter.
Yeah, sometimes didn't get mine, sometimes till August.
Yeah.
So
not much is changing, honestly, and that's there's good and bad with that. I can get into like what I think should change.
Well, yeah, let's get into that, because I mean, first of all, let's frame the discussion, because I think there are circumstances where commission makes sense.
Right.
Someplace where you could, or maybe we should start where perhaps it doesn't make sense. Is that, I'm a big believer that if sales really is a team sport in a company, and you're selling maybe a complex technical product, and lots of people play a role in getting the deal across the finish line, sales engineering itself, customers support, sales ops, whatever. Yeah, how do you disproportionately pay out more of the reward to the salesperson in that environment than the other people, right?
This is where it becomes a little bit of a math problem in that regard, because I'll back up and give my history on this really quickly. So QuotaPath is my second company I founded. The first company was Trendkite in Austin, Texas, and it was it was PR attribution. So if you were written about in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, we could identify and quantify the ROI on it. And we were very B2B sales heavy. So I ran that team. It grew to about 120 folks, account managers, SDR, all the way through. And the thing that I always thought about with it was that customer journey piece of it. And how do you comp along the way? We didn't have SDRs to start with. I kept it really, really, really simple. It was done on bookings. There's 10% bookings. You got a $1,000 bonus if you hit your monthly target of 25,000 in new bookings, and you got a $1,000 bonus if you hit your quarterly of 75K. We were monthly sales cycles, so monthly quotas. Super straightforward. Well, a couple things started to happen. The company grew and scaled, So adding roles and inbound demos, marketing, of course.
Right.
And then we also started to get more mature with our metrics. And one of those metrics became MRR, so monthly recurring revenue. And so the team then wanted to switch to MRR. And I was fine with that, but they wanted me to switch to MRR first and the rest of the team to be on bookings to kind of test this out, because I would take on the financial plan number of the MRR number. It's like, fine. And then halfway through this, we switched to ARR. So it was like, well, now I'm just going to confuse my team even more. But what ended up happening was like, once we got to ARR, I gave my sales managers ARR comp plans, and I really pushed hard to get the entire team to switch to ARR. But at the board level, our VP of finance didn't want to do that. They didn't want to upset anything. Like, well, now we have my management team working against my individual contributors on metrics, because the individual contributor is going to come to me and want to get a 2-year deal done, discounted at like 20% for a $20,000 booking number. And meanwhile, the ARR number is going to be $10,000 instead of the $12,000 that they would get for a 1-year contract. So it became kind of this nightmarish situation where I learned very quickly then that, oh, wait a second, alignment and simplicity and getting the board and the sales team on the same page. So the science of sales and the art of sales on the same page and aligned on the same comp plan is really critically important. And unfortunately, a lot of companies don't have the opportunity to have that, because they bring in a new VP of sales leader, CFO comes in, new board member. All of these people have inputs to the alignment of a sales comp plan, and that causes issue. I definitely think that the comp plan, if you have a strong enough sales leader, really does hinge on the VP of sales to get all those inputs. They should act like a product leader in that regard, take the inputs, and then present to the CEO, to the board, to get something signed off on.
Right, but instead of focusing on the process part of it, though, is I want to focus on this idea, as I said before, is does it still make sense, right? Because the whole goal of incentive compensation is to incent more production.
Sure.
Right? And it doesn't seem like it's doing that, right? I mean, if we look at the output, and I'll call the output productivity, let's say the dollars of revenue generated per hour of selling time by a rep today versus 20, 30, 40 plus years ago, I don't think it's any different, right?
Yeah.
It may even be less today. Yeah. So what then really is the value of the incentive if it's not achieving the goal of helping people achieve more, right? Give them the incentive to achieve more. And that's why I think that there are lots of conversations taking place. We had people on the show talk about before is it seems like the idea is just sort of fundamentally broken in many respects. It's an expectation, but when you look at what the value, and that's, I give that one example. If you have a complex deal, and I worked in a company years and decades ago, a startup that were selling very complex systems, denominated in the millions of dollars, and it was truly a team sale.
Yep.
And I was running sales, and we didn't pay a commission to our sellers because when we looked at the value contribution to getting the deal, I said, across the finish line, they didn't play a bigger role than sales engineering or other people.
Yeah.
So you couldn't really justify saying, well, look, they still got nicely compensated, and they got participation in a bonus pool that everybody could sort of participate in, but it didn't make sense to pay commission in that respect. And I think there's lots of things like that out there where, we're just sort of mindlessly paying salespeople for a job that, they're not even doing all of it. Now, I could certainly see on the other end where you have something a little more transactional. The seller is very self-sufficient. They can basically execute from start to finish without a lot of resources coming from the rest of the company. Product sort of an off-the-shelf product. Hey, I think it makes a lot of sense there. But it's like we're applying it uniformly across the board. And I said, if we want to be modern about it, it doesn't really seem to be very modern.
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head on the business model and what it looks like. You've had Scott Leese on the show, and he's a very transactional sales leader. And I think a lot of it is all about what is motivating that team in that moment. And it absolutely, on a day-to-day standpoint, because they see that number tick, There's absolutely there's absolutely results that show that that type of commission plan setting and that type of environment makes sense. I have a little bit of a tweener experience where our average deal size were in the $12,000 to $20,000 range, and we ran different competitions and different spiffs every single month. And I was a big believer in the sales acceleration formula. So this actually talks to what you're talking about with Mark Roberge's, where he looks at the customer journey all the way through, and how do you incentivize across that. I really agree that if you're just putting together a comp plan because, well, that's just what sales teams do, then you're probably not looking at it correctly. However, if you're looking at the role and what that person does and their value contribution, and you're doing a little bit of experimenting and testing all the way, what you will find, because there's lots of studies on this, that sales folks that put down their goals, that write down their goals, will have a more productive outcome. The challenge is you can't replace those goal settings with just a comp plan. And I think that's the fundamental difference between the two.
Well, but I also think, though, that some of those same studies, when they talk about the value of setting goals, is found that money is not the primary motivator.
Right. Exactly.
For most people in sales.
Yep.
And so, it's like we get people in there and then create these expectations where if it was expectation was set differently and saying, it's still a well-compensated position.
Yep.
But, there's lots of other ways to find fulfillment in this job and in this role that aren't tied to money.
You're 100% correct. And even more to that is there's two parts to that. Money is for salespeople even is not usually the reason people leave. It can be a catalyst. You can be fed up with it.
Sure.
But it's what you said. There's actually three things. It's the big picture of the company. Do I believe in what this company is doing? Mm-hmm. People that I work with, my peers, not just my boss. People quit bosses. That's one thing for sure.
Right.
But the people that I work with, the sales peers that I have on the team, and then
sure.
am I learning and growing? And through curiosity. Right. And so you have those three things, you're going to be pretty happy. And money's kind of an aside to that, all of those three things. But you also nailed it, because it's not necessarily the money, it's like the goal. So an example would be, I had a sales rep, and I just brought this example up recently, and she was a really good seller, but she was just like, she was very roller coaster. She was not consistent. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to get her a little bit more consistent, but also knew that she had it in her just to crush it and be our top seller. We had like 75 people on the team. So I said, Emily, look, let's set a goal of $100,000. What do you want for $100,000? She wanted a $1,700 purse. So I was like, okay, you sell $100,000. We'll get the purse. So every day she had this whiteboard that she would come in and tick off all the way across. And she had sold $135,000, $140,000 that month. It wasn't the money, the comp plan itself, but it was the goal. So my point to you is, like, it is a little bit more complicated when you start to look at roles and what their value contribution and what they're doing. And it takes a really strong sales leader to tie all those things together. But I would argue not putting together a comp plan is kind of a little bit of a lazy way on one hand. And putting together a comp plan that no one understands is also lazy. So it just takes a lot of work and effort for sales leaders to align their teams on this. That's what it really comes down to, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I just think there needs to be a broader discussion about the role of compensation in sales. And it sort of starts, getting back to quota. I mean, does quota serve a purpose anymore?
Does it? What do you think?
No.
Is that for all teams? Is that across the board, or is that just for the teams you've seen?
Well, I mean, I think perhaps for some that it might be a little more transactional, but I mean, let's look at Quota. Are you familiar with Goodhart's law?
No.
All right. So Charles Goodhart was a British economist. I think he came up with this back in 1965. And this is, since apparently based on what I've read, has been mathematically proven out, which is that his law is that when a measure becomes a target, it loses all value as a measure. All right. And that's a perfect description of quota. And the reason it starts losing value is that people change their behaviors. due to the goal. So when this measure becomes a target, people optimize their processes to attain the target.
Yeah.
I mean, that becomes the goal. But they could be capable of producing at a much higher rate, but they change their process to achieve the goal.
Yeah.
And so you could argue that setting quotas actually suppresses potential revenue production in most sales teams. But because we've been so bound up in our processes, we actually have this situation where, so few people are hitting quotas because of the way they're artificially set, with lack of science in most cases. That, okay. Gosh, you look at CSO Insights reports, fewer than 50% of sales, B2B sales reps are making quota. We know mathematically it's sort of a suppressant of productivity. Why do we still use it?
Well, the measures becoming targets is a fascinating experience. I can only tell from my anecdotal personal experience on this outside of what it had, because I don't disagree with you on the 50% less than quota, but I would argue it is less about what the target is and more about the company culture, the company team, the leadership, the hiring and recruiting practices, the onboarding and the training versus what you set the target. Target just becomes missing targets become a symptom of a lot of different things in those.
Oh yeah,
lot of things. But I will say that, I have a more of a transactional view of it in office of everyone's there on the last day of the month. And yeah, this is a part of it where you close 60% of your business on the last day of the month or 60% in the last 2 weeks of a quarter. Mm-hmm. Like that fits your model of like, that's broken. That is broken in a lot of ways. And the buyer experience. So let me actually stop here and say, well, my company very much tied to having to having targets, to having goals. We ourselves have a very customer journey viewpoint where as a buyer, you can try our service. If you're an individual, you can use it for free forever. I mean, it has like a Slack, and Asana and Dropbox type of view on it. I do that on purpose because where I actually think it's broken, and this is more to deal with products, is not the sales team so much as the product and the end user and building a product for the end user. So what I actually think is broken in targets and quotas is that people push over the line, do the heroic sell, get contract signed, and throw it over the fence to the CS team, and then the customer churns out. And Trendkite had 20% churn, so we were miserable in this area. We had a great outcome, but churn was, and that was something that I learned was, you have to bring this as a sales team. You have to bring the customer pain into the sales world all the way through the life cycle of it. And if you set exorbitant targets on the new business, then you're absolutely right. That's what they're focused in on. But if you identify where you as a CS person or a seller are making the end user happier, and you target off of those things, then that changes it. And so I go back to what your original point was.
Sure.
Is it broken? I don't think it's necessarily broken to do it, but I think what folks are thinking about how to do it is broken for sure.
Well, but I think you have to think and look at what is quota. I mean, ostensibly, quota is a measure of performance, and sales is supposed to be and sales management, let's say, sales leadership should be all about how do we improve individual performance.
Sure.
But if we denominate performance with the wrong measure and the wrong metric, it's like we start getting the situation we're in now where we're not really ever improving. So I'm fixated on this idea of productivity. And years and years ago, and productivity, using the classic definition of productivity, which is a rate of output per unit of input, not quantity of things that we do, and as is used in sales. So I managed teams where we measured dollars of revenue generated per hour of sales time.
Yeah. Did that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the reason it worked is that as a manager, you knew what was working, what was effective. I mean, I could have two sellers that both producing $1 million a year in revenue, but one was doing it in half the time. What we did is we tracked all the resources used by the company. So basically, people kept timesheets.
Yeah.
And so I knew, this guy may have used less than half of his own time, but he used 30% more resources from the rest of the company. He wasn't as self-sufficient.
I love that.
And so then you set up a situation where you say, okay, well, now we're not constrained by quotas anymore. Because what I want this person to do, if they've got a certain productivity factor,
yep,
I can calculate the number of actual selling hours I anticipate they'll have during a year. And when I multiply that by the same factors, because these are all individualized factors for the rest of the team, now I've got a real idea of what the productive capacity of my sales team is.
Yep.
It's no longer quota times 10 people and I'll factor it by 80% because most of them won't make it. It's this is how these people produce.
It's the real thing.
And if I can scale that, so then what you start looking at, well, geez, how do we compensate in that type of environment? Well, for me, one of the ways you want to do that is say, well, I want to compensate my sellers on improving their productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they can generate more dollars of revenue per hour of selling time, that means that they're taking responsibility for doing the things they need to do to improve their productivity. They're learning, they're engaging with new techniques, new skills. They're getting better at asking questions, whatever the dimension of the selling process is. Well, suddenly that starts making a lot of sense because the goal is individualized. The goal is, I need to improve what I'm doing today. And I've got a very specific way to measure it. And it's not based on some aggregate quota, but on my specific work.
Yeah. That is the whole thesis of Cracking the Sales Management Code, which is a great book that.
Yeah, I've had Jason on the show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. You did. So Jason and his co-authored it with, I forget her name. But they have this analogy, which I absolutely love and I take with me, which is, okay, so many sales leaders focus on results. They have the war room of results. Everyone has results. Share of wallets, new logo acquisition, blah, 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 blah. But that's the symptom of whatever the team did. It's to a T what you described. And so it backs up, and they have this great analogy in the book where activities drive objectives, drive results, where my daughter comes home with a B on her report card. I can't snap my fingers and change that to an A. That's never going to happen. But if she has a weekly report in math, or a weekly quiz, in math, and I study with her for 30 minutes a day, that's the activity, then she'll get an A on that quiz every Friday. So I just need to spend 30 minutes with her and I need to measure that. So I'll just measure that. Mm-hmm. Will drive objectives, which will drive results. Activities, objectives, results. I 100% buy into exactly how you're thinking about how that's thought about. And if you can quantify what that repeatable sales methodology is on productivity piece of it, you can start to see, okay, this is what an ideal seller will look like. This is what a challenger sales model, whatever model you do, Sandler, whatever you do, you take that and then you can bucket it. If you're able to actually do that for your organization as you scroll, and you have to do this constantly, it's a constant exercise. I do believe the goal of the quota and the target is really to create that aligned methodology, that A to Z selling, so that that productive person that you had, if they go through these checklist items and this is how they sell, this is what their output will be at the end of any given period. And if you can do that accurately, which again, we've talked about this, most sales teams cannot do that accurately. But if you can do that accurately, then the quota makes sense, in my opinion. But that's how I view it in the same lens. I think it just not a lot of teams get there.
Yeah, I think the difference way I look at it is that quota becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. Right? If you set out to sell $100,000 worth in a year, yeah, you'll sell 100,000. Yeah, somebody might go over, and you got the occasional people that are crushing quota, but in general, people are aiming toward that target. With the way I described it, there is no target. There is per hour, right? I mean, when you look at an aggregate like that, it's like every time I interact with a prospect, I've got to do better, right? So what do I need to do better? it sort of defies a common sales process to some degree. But the fact is, those that are sellers who are consistently good are doing something unique anyway. I mean, I dispute any sales leader who says, "Oh, the process is king, and sellers need the process to scale." And it's like, no, they don't. I mean, they know sort of what the process is, but if you look at your top 20%, I guarantee they're all doing it a little bit different because they're becoming the best version of themselves. That's how they've succeeded, not by becoming the best version of the idealized challenger salesperson that you think they should be. And so that's why I think when you make a target that is very individualized, like this productivity that I've used, is that people feel more autonomy and more empowered to succeed.
Yeah. You're still, in your model though, you're suggesting based on the productivity, there's still a level of variable component that people on your sales team would make different levels, or would they all make the exact same?
In my teams, it was always sort of pretty individualized.
Right. So they, so at the end of the year, was that transparent? Did they know who was performing better than others?
In aggregate, they did, yeah, because everybody knows, right?
But that was just based on the revenue number, or was that based on the productivity number that you showed them?
Based on the revenue numbers, everybody sort of knew, but they didn't know the productivity factor necessarily. No.
Okay. So based on the revenue numbers, they had a sense of like who was doing better, and they had a second sense of the pecking order.
Yeah.
Was there a performance plan where you said, "Hey, these five folks are not performing to code, to like whatever our code is"?
Yeah. Yep.
Was that based on productivity, or was that based on revenue?
It was really based on productivity.
That's interesting.
It's based on a number of factors, actually. I mean, it was revenue, it was productivity, it was planning based on execution of their plan. I worked for one startup where I was in another role with the startup, and I was brought in to run sales for this one group. And the productivity was very, very low, but we sort of made the decision based on that and based on these other factors of terms of engagement and execution of their plans and so on. We had 5 salespeople, all but one left. But then with just that person and one other and myself, we grew bookings 10 times the next year. Yeah. 10x next year. Yeah. And so, I think when people are aligned on this idea of, and it was hard for some people to really adjust to that, is they were accustomed to selling in that sort of quota environment. And when the emphasis then became on how effective are you really being, and how are you growing and developing, and how are you investing in getting better, it was hard for them. It was very hard for them. Because it seemed too different from what they're accustomed to. And
that's a part of it, right? That's the issue, and the kind of the big issue is the momentum of it. And when you go to recruit, and I'd be interested in that piece of it, you go to recruit for this type of person. I mean, I would probably just start with like account managers or folks that are a little bit more. I hate to use this word, relationship builders in that regard, and obviously work ethic and agility and all the things you need for sellers probably comes into it, but the traditional seller wouldn't fit into that box then, for sure.
Well, what's traditional, right? And that's, I've sort of considered myself in my career non-traditional seller, but it's very, very successful. But I did things my way. I've written about this a lot. I demanded the autonomy to develop the way that I wanted to develop. So for me, when I'm hiring people like that, I want people who are self-sufficient but curious and open to change and adapt quickly to change. And that's I think the sales environment we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we're so focused on process, what gets lost in translation, I believe, is that this whole idea that every opportunity is unique.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we think that every customer is just like every other customer, just because they fit our persona, yeah, I think this is where sellers miss the ball increasingly these days, because that's the way they're taught. Instead of saying every situation has its unique aspects to it, how do you operate in the moment to take advantage of those to help the customer achieve what they want?
Have you, is there anywhere you've looked at, like from a coaching tree? So obviously these sellers that you've developed have gone on to be sales leaders themselves and taken that playbook to other companies, and
Some
then
have.
had massive success. Well, some have, that's the thing. Some have, and probably some haven't. And doing
Yeah.
a comparison between those two would be pretty interesting, just to see how that nets out.
Actually, yeah, most of them, maybe not surprisingly, have gone on to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I've had a similar in, there's a handful of sales managers from Trendkite that are all entrepreneurs as well. It is an interesting carryover on the gene piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you bring up lots of good points on this. I think that the type of sell and what you're doing and how you're doing it and the culture of the team is radically more important than just like putting a number on the whiteboard. Overall.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, though, I think the culture, in too many instances where people I talk to on the show and other people I talk to, hundreds of people outside of this every year that are running teams, it's they want to substitute process and technology, and they think that's culture.
Yeah.
And it's not.
No.
Right? I mean, yeah, it becomes a culture, but it's not a healthy culture. And so I think, and this is a conversation I've had with people that sell sales technology and so on, is that sort of trying to push back on this idea that we're getting a little bit lazy and want to use the technology to sort of substitute for the judgment of the salesperson. And as soon as we start down that track, then we are going to continue to have these performance issues, because it's all going to be about activity and results, as opposed to how do we get better at what we're doing.
Yeah, and so I think the thing to keep in mind, as it relates, so QuotaPath, which is not calling out anything specific, but it's not an outreach, it's not a sales loft, it's not an activity driver. The thing that I like to liken it is it's a little bit like a mint.com for the sales team. It's a portfolio of their wins and how they've done. It shows their career metrics. We have a part of the app called My Path, which does exactly that. It's the aspirational career stuff that isn't as quantifiable as lots of these other things or Salesforce reports can tell you. And I agree wholeheartedly that I started my career, we used our own CRM. Meltwater had their own CRM.
Yeah.
We didn't have these email marketing, and I had a piece of paper that I would check off my productivity and activities that I had to send in every week to my manager of what I was doing. And I looked left and right and was like, wait, what is this person doing? What is this person doing? And that was helpful, but I was just kind of managing it and doing it myself and figuring that out altogether. I think along the same lines, where culture isn't technology, it isn't those things. It's the same with an office environment. You can have a really fun office environment with ping pong and everything. But if you don't have like the right people in the right place, the mentorship, the coaching and support to go on, technology, office, all that stuff's meaningless. Those are the important things. I'm fairly confident we share that viewpoint.
Oh yeah. No, I think that again, the slippery slope that I think we're embarked on is that coaching has become all about the metrics.
Lazy. Yeah, it's a lazy activity.
As opposed to saying, what do you want to achieve, and how can what's the fastest way I can help you achieve that? And achieve meaning in your life, at work, whatever, right? What's within my power to be able to help you achieve that? And these discussions just don't happen frequently enough. And
happen less now. A lot less now.
Yeah, I think they happen less now. And I think that is, this sort of loosely ties into what we're talking about today, because if we want to have cultures that are focused on performance, and I think this is where we sort of miss the boat in sales, and have. It's not new. This is not new. This has been the case, but it shouldn't be as much these days. Look at the revolution in professional sports, and this is a topic I bring up frequently on the show. The revolution in professional sports, soccer, for instance, my sport that I follow religiously, is in the last 10, 20 years, it's all been about performance improvement.
Yeah.
And you have these specialized coaches and detailed video analytics and data analytics. They track all their activity. They know when they should rest, when they should work harder, in training, and they can track their performance throughout a game. But then they
came out with Curry last week.
Say that again.
Did you see the thing that came out with Steph Curry last week?
I think so.
He has trained himself to get his heart rate down to 80 during timeouts.
Yeah, right. I saw that. Yeah,
his second wind all the way through. But it's very true.
But it's these types of things that just don't exist in sales, and so further reliance on things like quotas, sort of alarming, because again, we're just focused on this idea of these discrete set of results as opposed to saying, well, how do we really make these people better?
Yeah.
And I think we're clueless in general in this profession about how do we do that on a consistent basis. There are people that manage to do it themselves, whether they do. In my case, I did have a couple of mentors that were really key, but also I was immensely curious and reading books all the time and trying to learn anywhere I could and trying to learn from my experience. But we have to get back to this place, or get to this place where the coaches are really focused on how do I make this individual, how do I help them perform better?
Yeah.
And we haven't cracked that code yet.
Do you think so? There's an easy kind of like glooming red button that I see in this, is that we typically make our best sellers coaches, and our best sellers are our best sellers for a reason. And we harp on active listening. We harp on all of these things, but when you put then individual sellers into a sales manager, they don't take their own advice on how to sell in working with their team, which is listening to their team. So it's just one of those things where it's a catch-22 in some regard, where I've seen that happen all the time. I mean, I did all my one-on-ones walking. I was very clear on not distracting, and like wanted to make sure, which is why working inside is tough. So I think part of that is that we just have done a really bad job as, like, let's say VPs or sales leaders themselves, is cultivating those next line, frontline managers to do it. It's what you said. It's the reliance on technology.
Well, absolutely. Well, I think it's a broader problem, and in my mind, and the broader problem is that we don't develop the managers, right? We don't have this emphasis on performance improvement. There are increasing number of books being written about performance improvement, and there's increasing science behind it. We don't train managers in how to do that, how to coach, improve performance. Yeah. We don't teach sales VPs. And so we promote people into these roles, and we assume, since they have the role and the title, that they know what to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they don't. And it's unfair to everybody up and down the chain to make these assumptions. And I like to sort of give the hypothetical question, which I'll ask you, is we spend, figure I saw, is $20 billion a year on sales training in the United States, of which maybe 10% spent on training managers, maybe 5% spent on training sales managers. What if we flipped that ratio? What if we spent 90% of that $20 billion on training and coaching our sales bosses how to become performance coaches, performance improvement coaches, and gave them the tools and the skills to do that? We'd probably be much better off. Yeah. We'd probably have sellers perform at much higher levels when they had that type of support to help them grow.
You asked the question at the beginning of this of, like, what have we seen change about quotas and move? I actually will say, what will we see change post-COVID in just what how sales teams performs is that middle level manager has become exposed in a lot of ways. They've now, when they've taken on their team, they could kind of hide when it's more of an office environment. But now it's like sales leaders, wait, what is this manager doing again? And wait, how am I trying to make them successful? I've been spending so much time, and this is where you absolutely do nail it, so much time on that target that I haven't been able to focus on my team. So, because I'm always rushing to the next thing all the way through. And so that I have seen happen where a company that I know really well, I won't name names, but they fired I think there were 12 sales managers and they fired 6 of them. They just got rid of them for the summer. And they just realized that there was like not a lot of value add that those people, so it wasn't about the spend on technology or the value add of the individual contributor. It was about the value add of that middle level manager, frontline manager, not spending enough time with their team in actually helping and coaching them up. So I really agree with it. I don't know the answer to your question of what happens if you flip it. I loved the sales conferences were becoming overblown prior to COVID, but I didn't see a lot of it was focused maybe on the SDR, specific to SDR. Or maybe there were specific on closers and sales folks, but I didn't see much on the sales management of what you're proposing. And I think that someone is going to listen to this and say, I'm going to go build a conference on sales management and coaching and make millions of dollars, baby. I don't know.
I agree with your assessment that the conferences generally were overly fixated on top of funnel activities.
Yep.
Which, enough already. I mean,
enough noise.
I like to say that we know that sales profession's on the right track when the big conference everybody wants to go to is called Discovery and Qualification. And we could have a conference just on that. And that would be way more productive than...
Agree. Most important funnel. Yep.
Yeah, more talk, because that's where the actual selling happens. And again, I think that's just another trend that is starting to change a little bit.
That's where the real learning happens, though. So when you looked at your productivity metrics, if someone was spending half the time and they were spending half the time, but they were still crushing it on revenue, I would venture to bet that they understood their client's business model, the success metrics, what was going to make their product a win for them, and they could articulate it like that. So,
absolutely. I mean, it's a whole separate conversation to have, but thing that sellers, and this is, comes from managers not understanding this, thus they can't impart it to sellers, is that, and this has been researched by a guy won a Nobel Prize based on this, is that basically people's goal in life, buyers' goal in life is to make a good decision quickly. Not the best decision, not the optimal decision. It was all based on Herbert Simon, one Nobel Prize, wrote about this thing called bounded rationality and the constraints that people have on their decision making. But if you can be the seller, to the point you made, if you can be the seller that helps the buyer understand first how their solution meets the requirements and is sufficient to help them achieve their desired business goals, they'll stop looking and they'll buy.
Yeah.
and so, but most salespeople don't understand that. I mean, it's part of a bigger problem that exists in terms of how sellers conceptualize what the buyers are trying to achieve, but it's not taught, and it's a huge part of performance. And so it's just, we just need to up that game across the board. But the challenge is always that, CFOs and CEOs don't want to invest that much in sales. If they can feed it as little as possible and still hit targets, they're happy.
But then the question goes further that you ask is, if you could spend 90% of your training budget on getting managers to be able to coach on what you just articulated, that won a Nobel Prize, what would that result in? And what would that look like? I think there's absolutely a whole plethora of awesomeness that could await on the other side of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that, again, not to overdo the sports connection, but I mean, you look at coaches that come in and transform organizations. It's, take my favorite soccer club, Liverpool. They focus on. They have an expression. They talk about this. We train the person before we train the football player, right? So they focus on how do we help this person become a good human being, which is so essential for sellers, right? In order to make connections with other human beings. And then we're going to layer on the skills in a very specialized fashion. We're going to have specialized coaches to help them. I think how we structure sales management needs to change. Why do we have a single sales manager in the role they have? Well, we should have specialized coaches in organizations, coaches that really understand elements of the sales process or elements of performance improvement that would help sellers perform better.
Did you organize your teams in like pods? And then have specialized, almost a matrix style, where you had a manager that oversaw the whole pod, but then had specialized coaches or mentors for each role?
Well, I would, but I didn't at that time. No.
Yeah.
We were startups. Yeah. Being very frugal with our dollars.
We are. That is actually where we're putting our money on the growth side. So I won't even call us the sales team, but on the growth side is on the pod. Like, I really feel strongly. I actually would pinpoint the CS onboarding role as our most critical role instead of sales or even account management.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the make or break is for lots of organizations. But I know for us, that first 30 days so critical for our team. So we've done a lot of talking over the last year on the journey of like, okay, we're going to invest very heavily into making sure that role is successful, because then our customer
but even there in the CS role is I know some companies are doing this, but I haven't seen enough of them do it to say it's a trend. Is, hey, who's providing, I'll call it sales training, but it's really more than that, for their account managers, right? In the CS role, who understand, okay, well, how do I go into an account and develop new opportunities inside that account?
Yeah.
It's sales, it's business acumen, it's a number of things. And we just need to provide more tools to help them do that, because this is where the majority of the revenue is coming, right?
Right.
So especially in SaaS companies, what are we doing to help these people? And maybe we need to change the nature of who we hire into those roles.
Right? It's novel. It's such a novel thing when you think about it and when you articulate it that way. But then the question is, why is that not happening? Why are we not doing that?
Well, we're stuck. And that's just, I think we're at a point now where we're really stuck. We've been sort of in this model for 10, 15 years, sort of the specialized sales roles, specialized CS, all good to some degree. But we're now seeing an increasing number of companies saying, we got a little higher end, more complex product. That didn't really work for us. So we're switching, maybe we have more full cycle reps, or we were using some sort of ABM motion with teams or something. But it's not, we're migrating away from what we were doing before. And I think on the CS side, it's ripe for that. Yeah. It's a new business development role within an account.
Yeah.
That should be conceptualized that way. And then you'd say, oh, well, then we should be hiring a different level person for that.
Well, we're just starting our go-to-market fit journey personally at QuotaPath, but I will get back to you on that exact role in 1 year's time.
All right. Well, however I can help you, let me know.
I'm going to show for that, but I love it. I dig that whole thesis around it because it is the right, and I don't believe that we're stuck. I don't agree with that. I think the idea of stuck is that, well, we're more and more sales tools, more and more things. And so it's just like stuck as in things are just being thrown. But I have seen enough teams, certainly during COVID, that are thinking about it in more of a, they still have quotas and targets. Obviously, there are customers, but they are thinking about it in more of a training and more of a customer journey and more, where do I specialize and put dollars. And I know this because it's not just new business teams that are using QuotaPath now. Now we have CS teams that have a variable component, or account management, of course.
Well, they should.
So we're seeing it expand. Yeah, I mean, have a variable component to the whole company for sure. See what happens. Just experiment with it. But we are seeing that more and more to be the trend.
Well, I think that, just in closing, sort of the idea of being stuck is that, as we started talking about, is let's look at quota, right? We're stuck. There's a better way to do it. And no one, I don't say no one, very few people, there are some people having conversations increasingly about it, in terms of also just about maybe even redefining how the relationship between seller and employers, top sales talent, I think will become more mobile in different ways and compensated differently than they currently are, on much more of a value basis. So there are, inklings of things happening. I think that, just look at the way most companies conceptualize their sales process. I mean, if you look at it, go into a CRM system, Salesforce or wherever, and look at the steps of the sales process. Hey, I was using that same sales process back in 1977.
Band, MedPick, anything.
I mean, all that stuff. It's like
all that. Yeah, I know.
So we want to say, we're in a modern sales world, but all we've done is taken the same processes and automated them by and large.
Yeah.
And so we need to think differently. It's just, that's the bottom line, is where we just need to think differently about all of this. And there's so many aspects of it, whether it's, like I said, the sales process or quota, and challenge the assumptions, because, I've not seen, I said, any data to the contrary, but everything that I see and all the work that I do says, we just haven't gotten better in decades in sales. And it shouldn't be that way, because we have the advantage of all this technology. So why don't we learn how to use it and put it to use in such a way, combined with truly modern ways of looking at our customers and how we help them, that make a difference.
It's easy to see it, like there's very much a difference where you look at marketing and the different types of roles in marketing that have popped up and digitized over the years, and growth hacking and ABM, all this obviously trendy stuff, but it is that you haven't seen that same blueprint applied very much on the sales circuit. So that's you're right.
We're just hung up. I mean, I this is one of my favorite examples, and we'll unfortunately have to go, but it's been a pleasure talking to you. But it's, we still have so many people talking about, we're hiring people into hunter roles, right? And this one's always driven me crazy, because I've written something, but I haven't posted it yet, but I've done a little bit of research. And so, the number one form of hunting in the United States is deer hunting, by far, 3-1.
I'm in Pennsylvania. This is true. This is very true.
Yeah, and I grew up in Wisconsin. Deer hunting, very big in Wisconsin. And you look at deer hunting today, how they do it. Well, everybody hunts from stands. So they go out and they may scout an area, or may they have a stand that's been existing for a while, but they put up the stand and they go out and use, various means to attract the deer to come by. It's oftentimes like doe urine they spread on places and so on. And so the hunter today, the modern hunter today, is they sit in a stand and they wait for the deer to come to them. Now, doesn't that sound like inbound?
It's surely not walking around like cavemen with rocks in your hands and throwing them at elephants.
But we want to hire hunters. But the hunters sit in stands and wait for the deer to come to them.
It's very, very true.
We need a different word to describe what we want people to do, because hunting ain't it.
Yeah, anyway. I agree. I like it.
That's my irony of the day.
I appreciate it.
All right, AJ, been fantastic talking with you. So if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn is really the only the social media platform I'm on. But if you write me a personal note, do a little research and discovery, and think about it in a hunting mentality, I guess, I'll respond. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn.
All right, perfect. Well, AJ, thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy. I really appreciate it.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of the show. I'm also grateful that you invested your time with me today. So until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.